Welcome to the History of North America. I'm Mark Vinette. Jean Nicolet, also called Nicolet, was a French coureur des bois noted for exploring Lake Michigan, Green Bay, and being the first European to set foot in what is now the American state of Wisconsin. Certain that he was near the ocean, he stopped and returned to Quebec to report his discovery of a passage to the South Sea, unaware that he had just missed finding the upper Mississippi River. Join me as I continue a deep dive into the significance of the Mississippi River with the help of our friends at LibriVox.
Discovery and exploration of the Mississippi Valley and history of the discovery of the Mississippi River. On glancing at a map of America, we are at once struck by the mighty river Mississippi, which, with its countless branches, gathers the water of an immense valley and rolls its accumulated floods to the Gulf of Mexico, affording a line of uninterrupted communication for thousands of miles, which has in our day peopled its banks with flourishing towns and cities. So large a stream, so important a means of entering the heart of the continent, could not, it would be supposed, long remain unknown, or known, remain unappreciated. Yet, so in fact, it was. Columbus himself entered the Gulf of Mexico, but the southern coast only was explored by the discoverer of the New World. By whom the northern shore was first explored, we do not know, but it is laid down with considerable accuracy in an edition of Ptolemy, printed at Venice in 1513. This map is the more remarkable, as the delta of a river corresponding to the Mississippi is traced upon it more distinctly than in the maps of the next century. Several adventurers now sailed along the northern or Florida shore till it was completely examined. 3 years later, a map was drawn up by the arbitrator, appointed to decide between the claims of rival discoverers, and on it we find the Mississippi again, and on it the name it subsequently bore, Rio del Espiritu Santo, or River of the Holy Ghost.
The entrance of some missionaries into New Mexico in 1580, though fatal to themselves, led to new expeditions and to the final establishment of Spanish colonies there. Here, as before, they heard continually of the Mississippi, or Rio Grande del Espiritu Santo, and some seem actually to have reached it. But no steps were taken to explore it, and the Rio Grande is so called merely because some mistook it for the great river of De Soto. The Mississippi was now forgotten, and although explored for at least 1,000 miles, known to have at least 2 branches equal in size to the finest rivers of Spain, to be nearly a league wide and perfectly navigable. It is laid down on maps as an insignificant stream, often not even distinguished by its name of Espiritu Santo, and then we are left to conjecture what petty line was intended for the great river of the West. The Spaniards had thus abandoned the valley of the Mississippi, and a few years after the French at the north began to hear of it, and it was finally reached and explored by the Jesuit missionaries, the great pioneers of the North and West. Quebec was founded by Champlain in 1608. He was soon joined by Recollect friars, and while he entered the Seneca country with his Huron allies, the intrepid Father Le Caron had ascended the Ottawa and reached the banks of Lake Huron. Subsequently, others joined him there. They invited the Jesuits to aid them, and the tribes in the peninsula were visited from Detroit to Niagara and from Lake Nipissing to Montreal. The capture of Canada by the English in 1629 defeated any further missionary efforts for a time, but it was restored in 1632, and the Jesuits set out to continue the missions alone. They now became the first discoverers of the greater part of the interior of this continent. They were the first Europeans who formed a settlement on the coast of Maine, and among the first to reach it from the St. Lawrence. They, it was, who thoroughly explored the Saguenay, discovered Lake St. John, and led the way overland from Quebec to Hudson's Bay. It is to one of them that we owe the discovery of the rich and inexhaustible salt springs of Onondaga. Within 10 years of their second arrival, they had completed the examination of the country from Lake Superior to the Gulf, and founded several villages of Christian neophytes on the borders of the upper lakes. While the intercourse of the Dutch was yet confined to the Indians in the vicinity of Fort Orange, the French missionaries planted the cross at Sault Ste. Marie, whence they looked down on the Sioux country and the valley of the Mississippi. The vast unknown West now opened its prairies before them. Fortunately, the early missionaries were men of learning and observation. They felt deeply the importance of their position, and while acquitting themselves of the duties of their calling, carefully recorded the progress of events around them. Year after year, these accounts reached Europe, and for a long time were regularly issued from the press in the same epistolary form in which they were written. In the history of the French colonies, they are a source such as no other part of the country possesses. For our present purpose, they have been invaluable. From them we can trace step by step the gradual discovery of the Mississippi. The adventurous and noble-hearted Sieur Nicolet came out to Canada in 1618 and was never from that time unemployed. Almost immediately after his coming, he was sent to the plundering Hochnaranana, or Indiana of the island, above the Chaudière Falls on the Ottawa. Here he remained 2 years, often suffering from hunger and their brutality, but finally acquired a great knowledge of the Algonquin. After this, he was sent with 400 Algonquins to make peace with the Iroquois, and completely succeeded in his mission. He was then for 8 or 9 years stationed among the Nipissings, and became almost as Indian as they. After the restoration of Canada to France, he was made interpreter and commissary of the colony, which office he filled till he was sent, about 1639, to Green Bay and the Men of the Sea, where he met an assembly of 4,000 or 5,000 men, and concluded peace with them. It must have been at this time that he ascended the Fox River to the Wisconsin. Returning to Quebec, he succeeded as commissary and retained this office till his death. In 1641, we find him negotiating a peace with the Iroquois at Three Rivers. In 1642, sent from Quebec to Three Rivers to rescue a poor Abnaki from the hands of some pagan Algonquins, he set out in a small boat on the 31st of October at sunset, but a storm came on, and their little craft capsized near Sillery. Nicolet, unable to swim, sank to rise no more. Thus perished in a work of Christian charity the Sieur Nicolet, the first Frenchman who reached the waters of the Mississippi. As early as 1639, the adventurous and noble-hearted Sieur Nicolet, the interpreter of the colony, had struck west of the Hurons and, reaching the last limit of the Algonquins, found himself among the Winnebagoes, a people called so because they came from a distant sea, but whom some French erroneously called Puants. Like the Nadates, they spoke a language distinct from the Huron and Algonquin. With these, Nicolet entered the friendly relations and exploring Green Bay, ascended Fox River to its portage, and embarked on a river flowing west. And says Father Vimont, the Sieur Nicolet, who had penetrated furthest into those distant countries, avers that had he sailed 3 days more on a great river which flows from that lake, Green Bay, he would have found the sea. This shows that Nicolet mistook for the sea the Indian term Great Water applied to the Mississippi. It is certain then that to Nicolet is due the credit of having been the first to reach the waters of the Mississippi. The hope of reaching the Pacific now aroused the courage of the missionaries. Some fathers invited by the Algonquin were to be sent to those men of the other sea, but, prophetically, perhaps this voyage will be reserved for one of us who have some little knowledge of the Algonquin. The Lac des Pouanes is laid down on Champlain's map of 1632, but in all probability only from report, as it is placed north of Lake Superior, unless it is meant for Lake Winnipeg, which, like Green Bay, got its name from the Algonquin epithet for the Deotas, as coming from the Pacific. In 1641, 2 Jesuits from the Huron mission, the illustrious Isaac Jogues and Charles Raimbeau, were actually sent to Sault Ste. Marie's, and they too heard of the Sioux and the river on which they lay, and they burned to enter those new realms and speak that language yet unknown, which fell so strangely on their ears now, used to Huron and Algonquin sounds. The next year, the Iroquois War broke out in all its fury, and the missionaries had to abandon all hopes of extending to the west. The war proved fatal to the allies of the French. By 1650, all Upper Canada was a desert and not a mission. Not a single Indian was to be found.
I'm Mark Vinette, and I hope you'll join me next time.